I'm your host, Glen Alex, and this is the Glen Alex Show. Each episode of the Glen Alex Show focuses on a different aspect of health because I believe in total health and the whole person. All of you matter. And I am on a mission to help as many people as I can be joyful, connected, confident, and complete the life experience I call WELLTH, WELLTH, which is health plus other riches. So I hope you join us on this path to make this world safe and loving for everyone. And I'm excited about this episode of the Glen Alex Show because we get to look at family in a different light. So please help me welcome my guest, author Aaron Shelley. Hi, Aaron.
Hi, Glenn. Thanks a lot for giving me the opportunity to talk with you. I'm really excited.
Oh, well, thank you so much for being here. I'm excited too. So before we get into any of the meat of the topic, please just introduce yourself. Tell us who you are and what you do.
Yeah, so I did a mechanical engineering undergraduate, then I did a business degree, and then following that, I've worked at a lot of companies, some of them startups. I kind of ended up being an accidental author because I worked with another author on his book. But mostly what I work with is technology and business.
Okay, and an accidental author, how does that happen?
I was helping I'd just gotten through with a startup that didn't end well. And then my mom said, hey, there's this professor at the university that I went to. He's writing a book on family and business, actually family and entrepreneurship levels. And so I talked with him and I was kind of interested in it. I had time. And so I talked to him about what his topics were, researched different family structures for him, and then started to come up with my own ideas for how he should write his book. So I came up with about 50 pages of, hey, here's this model, use it for your book. I think this is a better thing than what you're using. And he said, no, that's your book. So it wasn't like I so want to be this author. I just did it. And then I actually stepped away from it. I almost had it published about 5 years ago. And then I stepped into kind of a technology role where I grew a company from about 20 to 180 people. And so now I've had a chance to step back from that. We just took $50 million in funding a year or two ago. And so I had the opportunity to step away from that. So now I'm back on the how can I help people and how can I help other families?
Okay. Oh, that's awesome. And for me, sometimes in life, doors open. A lot of people plan their journey and they have these step-by-step ways of their path. I love it when doors just open and we intuitively follow them. To me, that is very, very rewarding. So congratulations.
Thanks. I love planning as well, but I think there's a Mike Tyson quote that says, the best laid plans, everyone has a plan until they get hit in the face, I think is what he says. Right. And that's kind of, I think how life was for me.
Well, I'm glad you could take a punch and get up.
Multiple punches, yes, but it's fun.
Okay. So was that door opening what led you to this work?
There were two things. There were me kind of working in business and family that did it, but then there was also a friend of mine. My mom sent me an article about a friend of mine who was getting sentenced to life in prison for rape and attempted murder. And I hadn't talked to him for 10 years or so, but we had been, in the same school, same wealth, same church, same activities. And so that kind of started my engineering brain obsessing about this because I have 4 children. And I was like, if this happens to me, I don't want that to happen to me. I don't want it to happen to my children, more importantly. And so how do I prevent them from going down some of these paths, or at least help them avoid it if I don't understand what happened?
Okay. Okay. And so what did you learn in that research?
In that research, it was a matter, my book, I talk about the flywheel effect. You get good friends and then you'll get more good friends, or money begets more money if done well. Well, in his case, I think he'd played football. He had been on the team, and then he kind of had some drug stuff that he got caught up in for, I think, pain management. And then he kind of got stuck in this cycle of not getting a job and not being able to hold a job. And so there was a lot of just this, in business, we call it a death spiral, where you're getting worse and worse and you're not getting better and better. So that's where I looked at it. And there was some family issues actually, and his parents had been divorced. And so there was some father issues that he had as well.
Okay. Okay. Well, I hope that helps you be a better parent, and I hope those we can always learn from other people's experiences, right? I hope
Yep.
those kinds of stories help other parents just be better with their children and can create the successful family that you talk about. So, give us an overview of how families and businesses are similar.
Well, so at a very basic level, every business has what we call a business model. It has a strategy, like what it's trying to accomplish. It has a structure, how they're going to do those with meetings, rituals, those type of things. And then you have culture, which is the beliefs. Every company has that. Google had that when it was competing against Yahoo. Google was $1 million company and Yahoo was a $91 billion company. And somehow Google is now $1 trillion company plus, and Yahoo got sold to Comcast for something 20, $30 billion. So
Okay.
it's really about the business model is really how you make decisions with the resources you have. And that's why Google won. And that's why you see companies like Walmart has a different business model. They'll have a different culture than Google will, right? So all companies have different business models. Sometimes they're similar, but that's the metaphor that I think I like to use because all families are different. Some families get divorced, some families have a death, some families don't have children. There's so many different variants. It's much more about understanding the principles to build a successful family than saying this is the only way to make a successful family.
Okay. So, I mean, okay, so Google went from what, 1 million to what did you say? A
I think
trillion?
it's $1.5 trillion is its current valuation.
Holy moly. Okay, so why don't more businesses follow that model?
Well, their strategy, some of it's timing, but their strategy was organizing the world's data. And so they were Larry Page and Sergey Brin, when they started, they're engineers. They weren't like super interested in the money. They were interested in making the impact and organizing things.
Okay.
Therefore, they spent a lot of money on their search, making the search the best experience for the customer. Whereas Yahoo, they were making their money off display ads at the time. And so they wanted you to come to their website, spend time, go through their portals. They weren't trying to help you get to what you wanted. They were trying to help you or help them make money while kind of helping you. And so,
okay.
So that was a little bit different in terms of that strategy. And so you can't, I think it's a good strategy generally. How do you add the most value to your customers? And if you do that, then most people tend to find you quite valuable. You see that same strategy or similar mentality, I guess, in Walmart, where they're trying to keep prices low for American families.
Okay. So how can families employ the Google effect?
So first, you have to look at your strategy and your structure and your culture and make sure they're aligned. For instance, if I'm a doctor or want to become a doctor and I don't have delayed gratification, that's a bad combination. I have to have this ability to wait because, my brother-in-law, I think it took him till he was 31 before he graduated with his medical degree. And then he was in a ton of debt. Right. So if he wanted all the nice things in life early, he wouldn't have been able to do that. Like, you have to have delayed gratification. You have to have a strong work ethic. You also have to deal with a lot of pain and figure out how are you going to build your family? You're going to delay your family so you don't have kids because you're going into debt. And you don't have a lot of income because you're paying for your education. So that's where I say it's a lot around, if you're going to be a doctor, that's great, but you kind of need to make sure you're not like, oh, and now I'm going to have 6 kids while in the medical program. And how's that going to work with your wife? Is your wife working? Great. Who's taking care of the kids? So it's really just figuring out roles and responsibilities, some of those structure things with your spouse, if you have one.
Okay. So how do you recommend that families go about identifying an appropriate strategy, defining their culture, and setting up a structure that's an effective structure?
Sure. Well, so the culture is probably the one that we obviously know, right? We have our culture that we got from our parents. What are our beliefs? Mm-hmm. Do we believe that for some reason I can't make it? Do we believe that in my family, my dad was an academic and you have to go through a lot of learning. And one of his quotes was, "There are no failures, just learning opportunities." Right? That's a very scientific approach, where sometimes you do research and you don't find the results you want. So the culture is often much harder to change, but you can usually kind of identify, like, what do you really value? Do you really value novelty, or do you value security? So a lot of that's trying to help understand yourself.
Okay.
So your culture, and a lot of times you can look to your parents, and then you kind of go, well, what would I rather have? More money or better relationships? More like, and I have a worksheet on the website, the Family Flywheel, that can kind of walk you through that. I also talk through in the book different strategy structures and cultures. But so if we go back to what's your culture, usually you can kind of figure that out. What do you believe? Then you go through, what's your structure? What are your meetings that you're going to have with your spouse, with your children? What is your timing? What's your schedule going to be? Most successful people I know, they have a fairly regimented routine in the mornings and in the night to make sure that they're kind of operating at peak levels. And then you kind of look at this strategy. That's kind of the most important. What is your purpose? Like, what do you feel like you need to do in this life? And that can change over time, but what are you driving towards? And so that's the part of that strategy, is like, what is your purpose? If your purpose is to heal people, great. That means you could be a doctor, a nurse, you could go into mental health care. There's so many different areas. So you kind of then choose what careers are you interested in? And then those strategies you look at, like, if you want to be a doctor, okay, does your career support that? If not, or your culture support it. If your culture doesn't support it, maybe you go into the military, like a friend of mine, to become a doctor, because then he didn't have to pay off debt. Right. So that's some of the structure stuff. But he had to stay in the military for 4 years. So this is kind of the structure stuff. He wanted to be white collar, but he went military first. Then he kind of transitioned into this white collar.
Okay.
So does that make sense?
It does. It does. And it begs the question, the family has a goal, so they have a strategy to attain that goal that's built upon their culture and the structure, if I'm understanding correctly. What if a member of the family has a different goal?
Well, it's not uncommon for children to sometimes have different goals. It's very challenging if your spouse has a different goal. I mean, this is why I say the business lens is so interesting. Like, if you and I said we're going to go into business, and I said, I want to go start an accounting firm, and you say, I want to go do podcasts, we say, maybe we shouldn't go into business together, because we don't have the same goals.
Right.
And I think a lot of people aren't really looking at that. I've had a number of, I currently am doing some consulting. There's a woman that I do. She's very successful, but at one point she was like, yeah, my goal is I want to have a family. She had been divorced and had 2 children. And she's like, but now I want to be this VP, and I want to marry this guy who's super, super strong. And I was like, well, the super strong guys that are executives, they usually focus on their career, but you're focusing on your career. Who do you want to have 2 more kids, and you have 2 kids already? Who's doing what? Like, just logistically.
Right.
And if you can find a guy who wants to stay home, maybe that's the guy you want. But she's like, well, I don't want that guy. Well, let's just think through. And she's having trouble dating. And I'm like, well, maybe the reason you're having trouble dating is because you don't even know what you're looking for, and it doesn't even make sense. So even if I found a guy like that who was an executive, he'd be like, I don't want a girl like you, because I need someone to stay home. Right. So it's really not, and it's not saying this is why I say it's not a right or wrong. It's just trying to look at the logistics. How are we going to complement each other? Right? If you look at it, we wanted to start a business, and you say, I want to do a podcast, and I say, I want to do video editing, and I'll help you. Great. That sounds like a good business. We could be good partners. But that's really where I think a lot of people now, for some reason, aren't thinking of it like this is a partnership for a greater goal. It's, well, she's hot, so let's get married, or let's move in.
Right. And we can talk more about relationships later, but I have to say now that I have clients who have relationship issues, and I tell them it's a business agreement up front. Your goals have to be aligned for the partnership to move in the same direction successfully, because a lot of times there'll be these unspoken and unrealistic expectations that never get talked about until, the shit hits the fan, so to speak. So
100%.
it's a business up front. They say, well, that takes all the love out of it. No, that leaves room for more love.
Yeah. Well, and like you say, there's some people who go into marriages, they're like, it's 50-50. And you're like, yes, in the US, it is a 50-50. It's a contract. When you're married, 50% of the resources go to either party if you were to split up. So it is a contract.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can't sit and pretend like, well, the purpose we're getting married, that we take out love. Love is something that holds it together, but it's really like, what parts are we going to play in this? Because the older I got, I was young, it was like, oh, there's only this one person in the whole world that I could ever be married to, blah, blah, blah. Like we kind of were pushed this agenda. But as I've seen, I'm like, there's a lot of really great people. It's really, who do you want to work with and who do you want to create a life with?
Yes. Yes. Okay. So that's a problem if the spouse has a different goal than the family. What if one of the children has a different goal than what the family has decided or is working toward? And does it make a difference the age that child has a different goal?
Yeah. I mean, this is the same thing you'd have in a company, right? If you were working at a company, I worked at Ancestry, and the goal was, or our mission was, to connect families across distance and time.
Okay.
Right. And so if someone's like, well, I don't care about that, I just want to work in fashion. Okay, there's a problem. I mean, you don't fire your kids the same way, but a lot of companies, you're like, well, what are we about? And I don't know that a lot of families necessarily have an identity. So it's not like you're saying, hey, you're not doing this, or you don't want to do this thing. It's like, well, what are we doing together? Do your kids need to be involved? But if they want to go off, and I mean, that's kind of where you want to make your broad umbrella. Is your goal to create this family that's the next Carnegie's, this massive thing, or is it to create a family that supports each other, helpful, creating successful kids? Because there's a point where you always see kids want to rebel a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're like, well, is this a learning thing? Or is this no, I want to burn your house down. Like, I hate this company. I hate this family. Everything you've taught me is crap.
Okay.
That doesn't
That's
happen
different.
as much. So it's like, what is the goal of the family that they could be involved in?
Okay. Okay. And would you say that all of the goal, the family identity, all of that comes from the culture?
It should be in the culture. I mean, the parents should be living it. If you're saying,
Okay.
my goal, I mean, there's a book by venture capitalist Ben Horowitz where he talks about culture. He's like, you can't have a culture if you're not living it. And in a small company, you are the culture, right? If there's two people, are you guys hard workers that do whatever it takes, or are you 8-to-5ers who check out? So it's like, that's where the culture is really defined by the parents. The problem that I see is it's not defined outright, so there's places where you may say conflict is good. It's good to have different opinions. We just need to have productive discussions. But if you don't outline that for your children, you may believe that, but then your children, and I've seen this with some of my siblings, they don't believe in conflict is good in relationships.
Okay.
Right. And so it's like, how are the parents outlining what they think are the important elements of the family relationship and explaining it to the kids? My experience has been that most kids are just kind of pieced together. Well, mom did this and dad did this, and therefore here's what our family is. They're just trying to make sense of it. So it's up to us as parents to be a little more descriptive about what our values are and explain them to our kids and teach them, right? That's kind of the important thing for us as parents, is to teach the kids our business model, because if you've been successful, you're really trying to help your kids be successful. Like, here's what I learned. Please make different mistakes. It'll be interesting for both of us. Don't make the same ones I did.
Right, right. Well, I love that you said the parents must live their culture.
Mm-hmm.
You can't just say it, because kids tend to pay more attention to what you do and not what's said. So thank you for pointing that out.
Yeah, it's a little bit about, like, my dad, for instance, he loved learning. And every time I'd wake up at like 6 a.m., randomly, you know, if I was sick or something, I'd see him studying. And it was like, it was clear what he valued. Or later, I remember he was kind of the chubby, normal dad. And then for some reason, he kind of got into yoga and all of a sudden he's doing this weird crap. I'm like, oh, you're one of these weird people who loves to learn, who loves to push yourself, who will be disciplined.
Yes.
And it was very clear from his actions. But I think there was a point where he missed out on some of the alliterating what his cultural values were and what they meant.
Okay.
Right.
Okay. Okay. So what part does social resources play in the family, the business of family?
Yeah. So if let's go to the business real quick. So if you say each business has financial resources, money, property, tools, those type of things, it has social resources, which would be its one-on-one relationships, its group relationships, and then its brand or its reputation.
Okay.
So that's every business has those. Marketing and sales really are the social people there. And then you have human resources, which are the people and their abilities, their time, and their health. So that's a business. Well, if you look at a family, we have the same thing in our communities. We have our relationships with each other. You talk about those in your book, like how do you have good relationships and boundaries and those type of things. And then you're looking at your groups. What groups are you associated with? You know, are you going to a church? Do you go to sports groups? What other groups? Because a lot of times people in groups, even if you don't know them, they will help you, right? And then you have your reputation. And over time, we build our reputation. And then if we do well, we can kind of pass that reputation on to our children. Like, oh, you know, this is Glen's child. We know how they're going to act, because if they don't act that way, we know she's going to make it right. Right? I mean, that's kind of the thing when you have a reputation in your community.
Yes.
That's where I think there's those social connections. And lately, we've been pushing very heavily to judge our success purely based on our financial, success. How much money do I make at a job? And that's caused a lot of families to go to income, and then they ignore those social connections and those social relationships, which I think leads to a lot of the mental health problems. It also leads to disintegrating relationships even within the house between the spouses and between the children. So that's where I say those social resources are super important for a company. And you would never say to a company, ignore marketing and sales. It would be retarded. But we do that. We've done that for some reason with families.
Wow, that's a lot. And it's important. And I think that anytime we only focus on one outcome, money, then we do we starve ourselves of the more important intangibles in life. And our social connections are huge because we're social creatures.
Yeah, this is one of the things I point out too, is there's things like when we move, sometimes we'll be like, oh, I can go to get a job in a different city, $10,000 more, $20,000 more. Yes, but how much of your social connections are you giving up? Right? This is the other thing that's interesting in companies. If you look at that, like Nike, their brand is worth so much, but even on their balance sheet for their financials, they call it goodwill. There's no way to know how much the brand is actually worth. And that's the same thing in our social connections. It's hard to say, well, me moving and it'll give me away from my parents, and so I won't have that social support. And then when I have children, they won't be able to help out. So there's all these things that make it difficult. My wife teaches Irish dance. We run an Irish dance school for the last 20 years. And if my sister lived close by, then I could say, hey, come and put your kids in the class and we can do it for free. But since she lives in a different state, I'm not going to take money and pay for her lessons, right? That seems weird. Right. So it's a weird thing. Like by her moving to where she went, which is 6 or 8 hours away, I'm unable to give her a lot of the social support, which I could for free, just because she's not here.
Okay. So social resources are huge. How do you recommend families approach resource allocation? Because I have clients whose parents demanded that every child do the same thing the same way at the same level of efficiency and success. That's just not realistic because we're individual, we're different. How do you suggest parents approach that responsibly?
the resource allocation. Well, this is coming down to what is your goal and mission, right? If your goal is to have a tight-knit family and to have really strong bonds there that are supportive, that'll help you through life, then you better be investing in activities that are family related, right? I took my kids skiing. We all learned how to snow ski together. We all learned to mountain bike together. We did a lot of those activities together. We went hiking. I live in Utah, so southern Utah has 5 national parks, which are gorgeous. So we did those type of activities. And there's some people who are optimizing, well, I want my kid to, this kid is going to play soccer, this one plays football, this one plays this. And then they just are kind of like, well, we can never spend family time together because everyone's just being shuttled from activity to activity. So I think it's a prioritization of, well, which ones do you care about? And what are you giving up? Because you want your kids in some activities, but you don't want it to take over your family life, or you won't have a strong culture. So it's kind of, what is your purpose? What is your overall goal as a family? And are you driving towards that? That's really how you have to prioritize.
Okay. So have you encountered the family, say, for example, that is sports oriented? They love outdoor stuff. They love watching games, attending, these sports events, etc. And then there's this one kid who is not athletic and who's just simply not interested. They'd rather read a book. And so the adults I deal with, they, ostracized, feeling worthless, and et cetera. So have you encountered that kind of situation? And if yes, how do you handle it?
So I've seen it with my own children. I had like when we did skiing, let's be honest, you fall down a lot.
Uh-huh.
It hurts a lot.
Uh-huh.
I mean, I ended up breaking my collarbone right
Oh.
here. My daughter actually just this year, she broke her leg. So there's this place where it is going to be athletic and you're going to push yourself. In some things, my goal with those activities is really, am I teaching them the process of overcoming? That's really what there's a family time, and then there's the process of overcoming. Like, you will fall down, then you learn, then you fall down less. Now we go down a little steeper slope. So you're trying to teach the process. Okay. So I would try to, I would bring things to try to make it as fun as possible, because I had a couple of my kids were like, oh, I don't know. So I would be like, hey, let's bring treats. And then after we go, we always get to go out to eat and make sure it's fun and enjoyable, because there is pain with that level of learning. And if you don't make some of those painful experiences good, then they will leave them. So that's where I think, from my own experience, I haven't had complete, like, I don't want to do it. It's more like the resistance and the scared. If you have someone who's totally different, it would be interesting to see how that happens. It's like, were you taking your kids with you on your activities? Were you reading with them? I mean, if you neglect them for 10 years and then you wonder why they don't like to do the same stuff as you, then it's kind of an obvious case. But to me, I was always kind of doing stuff with them through the years, and therefore I didn't have these big divides. But there are some that happen, and to me, it's like, well, how is it more important to pull them in and say, okay, well, we'll do a shorter hike, or you can sit at the lodge while we ski. Like, there's a lot of things that are coming around. Like, you want to include them as much as possible.
Okay. While you respect their difference.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Very good. Now, you mentioned in your article about trust and transparency. Successful businesses have both. What about the family where the parents say, because I said so?
I think I've thought about that, and I think there's some developmental stuff. If you look at kids when they're super young, a 2-year-old, why shouldn't I cross the road? Well, should I explain the physics of it? Should I explain, like, at what level can I explain it to the kid? So there's a place where you need to have some basic rules for safety that the kids follow. I think once they start to reason and say, well, why? Well, you say, well, and you start to actually go through the rules. If you have rules that are just rules for no real purpose, then it's a problem. You should have a purpose behind the rules. Like, why do I need to go to bed at 9? Why do I need to read books? Why can't I just play games? Why can't I be on social media? You should take some time. Well, here's why. You're trying to teach them how to think, right? And reason. That's really why you're concerned with those and setting those boundaries. So that's where I think you need to discuss it once they get into the place where they can actually understand it. Trying to keep it age appropriate can be challenging, but I think it's better to give a little more complexity than just, well, you have to right now. Then people are just like, oh, you're a tyrant. So when I'm a parent, I can be a tyrant too. And that's where you see it, in companies, you'll see the same thing. Like as a CEO, you can't just be like, do what I say. We're all adults and we want to understand why, and we want to learn. So I think explaining things in a business sense is important. And I think it's important in a family sense as well.
Okay. Boy, you're touching on pretty much every aspect of relationships, because you're talking about communication right there, genuine communication. I like it. I like it. Now, I have one question that I also read in your work about hiring a spouse. What is that about?
Well, if I view that as it's a little bit of an edgy thing. We've talked about a little bit, but it's how are you see these kids now on these apps, and they're just looking, is this person attractive? No, yes. Oh, maybe I'll look a little bit. Boom. What do they care about? Right. If we don't hire people like that into companies, we think about it and go, what do we want this person to do? What skills do we want them to have? What culture do they want them to have? It can be so challenging. And I've seen this in a number of relationships. If you marry different cultural values than you're used to, right? Like my dad was a white collar, he was a professor. He gets more and more valuable as he gets more and more experience. Whereas if you look at someone who's blue collar, usually their body starts to break down because it's so demanding, whether you're in, plumbing. I have a brother who's an arborist. He cuts trees down. So my sister, who married the arborist, she was like, how do I do this? Now this model's breaking down because he's getting older and he hasn't transitioned to a different business model. Like most blue collar people will transition to be the entrepreneur and hire people and train people. But he didn't want to do that because he didn't like to train people and didn't trust them. So then you're like, ooh, your business model's breaking down. Like it was good for a little bit, but it will break down. So that's where I think it's looking at it like you would a job. What cultural values do they need to have? What skills do they need to have? Right. I mean, my wife, I don't think would be a great wife for Donald Trump. And I don't think, he needs like this socialite type person. So it's really like, what are you expecting out of this person, thinking through that and kind of putting together a job description so you can go, well, they're very attractive and we get along, but our cultures are so far apart. It's going to be rough to try to build a relationship here.
Oh, but if you love them enough, they'll change.
Yeah. That is a great myth, but it would be like hiring someone who loves sales and then wondering why they're not a good programmer, right? You're like, dude, you suck so bad at programming. Yeah, I'm a salesperson. Put me in that role, I'll excel. Put me in the other role and I will fail. Okay. And so that's where I look at it. Like you can hope that they'll change. You can think, oh, I could show them a better way. But that's their culture and a lot of that's their identity, and that can be very challenging. So try to hire, look at it more from a job description. What is the culture? I mean, I ended up, my father-in-law was an electrical engineer. I studied mechanical engineering, right? My father-in-law did a lot of the work in the house. I've done a lot of that, right? There's those cultural elements and structural things were very easy for my wife and I to come together. There's always friction, but it was much easier than if, she had been, Donald Trump's daughter and used to just entertaining people. And I'm like, we got to work here. Like, there's some hard stuff we got to get through together.
Okay. So are there any specific mental health issues that you've seen come out of, I don't know, a poor family business model?
Yeah. I mean, I think the biggest mental health that I've seen, and it's been fairly close, is these young kids who, especially young boys, who don't really they weren't really trained, they weren't really pushed when they were young, either because their dad was away all the time or they didn't have a dad. So then they kind of were just wandering around trying to figure out what to do, depression. You have some of the transgender stuff that I've heard. I'm like, they don't know where their place in the world is. And so that's where I think adults, our parents especially, we're supposed to help them find their place. And I think we've hit this place where you can be anything. Yeah, but I don't need to be anything. I need to be something. So it's much more like, how are we helping our kids find the thing that they can be successful? Or, I mean, like you say, it can be a little bit of a weavy path through life, but helping them get on successful paths, not being like, I don't know, you have so much potential. Cool, but potential to do what? I need direction more so than I need, encouragement of you choose.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of cheerleading because half the teams with cheerleaders lose. So
Uh-huh.
I'm interested in productive and constructive guidance and thinking patterns. So that is really unfortunate, and I do um, worry honestly about the younger generations because of that lack of direction and just this attachment to um, these facades of social media of what other people's lives look like. So I'm actually very worried about it.
Yeah, and I've seen that with some of my kids when they were going through the younger years and having trouble with social media because they're comparing themselves to, oh,
Mhm.
this is, it used to be you'd compare yourself to your group. Well, I'm okay. I'm pretty good attractiveness. Now you're going, I'm going to compare myself to every woman in the world on
Yeah,
Instagram.
yeah.
Holy cow, she's so hot. Like, there's no way I can compete. So there's a lot of that comparison stuff that I've seen where you're like, why do you care? Like, she lives 1,000 miles away. She's not in
She
the
might
same.
have had surgery.
Yeah, she's not natural. Well, and then the other thing, like you say on Instagram, that facade, there was one woman, I was listening on YouTube, and this woman had reached out and said, hey, can you come? You're like this very powerful, boss babe. You're doing so well in life. She reached out on Instagram and she was pushing, like putting all the great things up. And she said, I'd love to, but I don't know where I'm going to be because I'm homeless right now. Right. And so you're like, wait, what? You have this facade of everything put together, and yet everything is literally the worst it could be
Oh
almost.
my gosh. Okay. Wow. What a bummer. Okay. Oh, wow. Aaron, this is fascinating. I had an idea of what to expect, yet I didn't know what to expect. So I'm really liking the connection you made between successful businesses and successful families. And I love that you do bring in these different elements of healthy relationships because they are very important to our health and well-being. So give us a what is give us a nugget. What is the one takeaway, if you can narrow it down to one, that you want the audience to have?
I think it would be around investing in those social connections. I think just like in a business, the social relationships are hard to see, but you can do that in so many ways if you're at college, when you're in different groups, when you're in your neighborhood, just reaching out, even in your company, reaching out and working on those relationships, what I call investing for social returns,
Mm-hmm.
that will help you be more successful in all areas of your life. If you have good people, they will help you find I had my most successful job that I had was from a friend of 17 years. And it just happened to be finally right time, right place. And we had been connected for that long and I hadn't moved. So invest in those social connections and you will find yourself much healthier and wealthier than you would otherwise.
Okay, I like that. I like that a lot. So you authored the book, The Family Flywheel.
Mm-hmm.
How can anyone purchase the book or reach out to you if they have any questions or want some consulting?
Yeah, so my book's on Amazon, in Audible. That was fun recording it. No one likes listening to themselves. Audible, soft cover, and in the Kindle format. It's on some other places, different Audible places or audiobooks. And then I have a website, thefamilyflywheel.com. You can email me at aaron@thefamilyflywheel.com. I'd love to hear from people. I'm really in this to help. And then you can find me on LinkedIn and Facebook at Aaron K. Shelley.
Okay, and you do have a free download on your website.
Yeah, I have a number of free downloads. It's a form to help you kind of go through what's your business model. This isn't a trivial thing. What's your purpose in life? What are your cultural values? What are the structures? What are your what's your culture, trying to figure that out. And then also looking at your resources, because I do think that a lot of people have a lot more access to resources than they are aware of. I don't know about you, but I love helping people who ask me like, hey, can you help me with this? Yes, for sure. Even if it's monetary, but a lot of times that's not the most important things. I can help them with connections. So it's helping with really define your resources and define your business model.
Okay. Okay. Wow. This has been really interesting, and time has actually flown. So
Yep.
I really, really do appreciate you being here. And I really hope people reach out to you, or at least put these elements into play into their own family, so we can make this world better for everybody.
Yeah, the metaphor I use is every family is a pillar in our society, and we're like the Colosseum. We have all these pillars, and if we knock out too many, the whole society is going to collapse. So I'm really trying to reinforce all these pillars in any way that I can. So please reach out if I can do anything for you.
Okay. All right. You hear them. You heard that, audience. Please reach out to Aaron and see how he can help you. And thank you again for tuning in to this episode of the Glen Alex Show. We really hope that you gained a new understanding of family and how you can help your family function well to help all of us. So please reach out to Aaron if you need to, and tune into the Glen Alex Show for the next episode. Thank you.
Refresh your spirit with a nourishing thought.
Please allow me to leave you with this nourishing thought. Actress Bakshan said, "My family is my strength and my weakness." As a clinical social worker, I work with adults who carry childhood wounds from family issues. Family is our first introduction into socialization and to humanity. So childhood wounds very often show up in adulthood. And FYI, many people believe that they should just be over it because time has passed. The reality is, we don't just get over it without appropriately processing experiences. And one key to a healthy adulthood is a functional family. Such minimizes the emotional and mental wounds that are created in childhood and that carry over into adulthood. You see, every family has different levels of dysfunction. That's why there are these different theories out there to help families function well. I suggest you start with understanding and respecting the diverse personalities, needs, and capabilities of each member, so you can make your family a source of strength. And reach out for guidance if you need support or help in this area. You could also learn more about family and relationships by visiting glenalex.com, by ordering your copy of my award-winning book, Living in Total Health, and by scheduling your complimentary consultation with me to help you appropriately process experiences. Then tune in to the next episode of the Glen Alex Show. And until next time, be well.
Joyful